and Burton.
Thank you, Atik. Mr. Secretary Mesbah Alam, Minister of Environment and Forests, Dr. Rajendra Pachari, Chair of IPCC, Salim, Atik, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, many old friends and many new ones. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak again to you because you may recall I did that on Monday morning while we were waiting to hear Sheikh Hasina arrive. I'm just amazed by the energy and enthusiasm and level of conversation that has somehow been maintained over this 4 days and the 3 days that preceded it in the field. It speaks volumes about the nature of this topic and the people that are getting engaged. Now, you may see that it's this little talk has been identified as a keynote address, which I think is rather a strange name for something to come at the end of the program, don't you? And that is because I was originally going to be giving this address on Monday morning, and it got curtailed and curtailed and curtailed for one reason or another. And then they thought, well, it might be better if we put him at the end. So I was moved down to the end. But unfortunately, they forgot to take off this word keynote. So it's not a keynote address; it's an end note address. In fact, it's not even an end note address because so much has been said, and more or less everything has been said, as far as I can see, that I'd really prefer to call it a footnote address. Well, perhaps more than one footnote, just two or three footnotes. So it's called, this long, complicated title that Atik read, Upscaling Community-Based Adaptation from Local to Global and from Project to Transformational Adaptation. That's quite a mouthful, and I have actually written a paper that says something about that, and I'll make it available on one of these blogs or webs or somewhere, but I'm not going to attempt to do that now, except to amend that slightly to say when I say to, from, and to, from, I don't mean that you abandon where you were and move to somewhere else. I don't mean to, from, I mean and, because we still have to do a lot more in local and projects as well as global, national, global, and more transformational adaptation. So on Monday morning, I mentioned 5 points that I thought were going to be important elements in our discussions. And they were the terms that you've heard a lot now in the last 3 days: outscale, upscale, integrate, strategize, and mitigate. And those were my 5 bullets. And what I might have said about that on Monday morning has become a lot more rich now as a result of all the discussions and all the things that I and you have heard. And I don't want to go into any length about those, except to add perhaps a little footnote on each, and then add a 6th bullet point. So outscaling, yes, we do need to bring more players to this table, to expand this community. Of course, it's difficult to accommodate the community that is already grown well beyond the confines of one annual CBA conference. But we are dealing with some sort of a disease. It's a rather negative analogy, I'm sorry about that, but it's the best one I could find. We're in a process of contagion, and CBA is becoming it threatens to become a global pandemic. And I think that's a good thing. That's what we want. We want it to spread very widely. We want everybody to be engaged and to know about it. So go home, engage others, organize to the extent that organization in this field is going to be possible. But don't try to own it. This is something to pass on, to give to somebody else. Upscaling. Of course, we must get recognition at the local government level, at national and international levels. Earlier in this conference, I heard somebody mention that old phrase about trickle down. Remember, we had that idea that you developed somehow at the top of the hierarchy, and then all the benefits of development eventually trickled down. to where they were most needed. Well, we don't use that expression trickle down anymore, but I think it still characterizes a lot of what passes for development. And I think what you see here is something quite the reverse, and I would prefer to call it flood up instead of trickle down. And I think that's a sort of part of a process in which we are engaged. It's a movement, it's a flood up movement, and the kind of new methods and communications and instruments that Salim has just been describing are an important part of that sort of process. Also, I'd like to say that a part of that is that we're sort of in an ecosystem of ideas, an ecosystem of practice. And those are things that are very hard to kind of organize and regiment and arrange in some sort of hierarchical fashion. It's much more of an organic kind of module. So by all means, make it more strong intellectually, debate the definitions of terms, agree on them to the extent that that's possible, but don't expect them to stick. These things are going to grow, and they're going to evolve, and they're going to change. And new ideas will give rise to other new ideas. We talked a lot, in fact, about integration, about the need to avoid adaptation stovepipes, the need to get adaptation to climate change at the community level integrated alongside a lot of other things. And this is a bit of a dilemma. How much do we maintain this special identity? And people have been speaking in the latter part of this meeting about the need to sort of make sure when we talk about community-based adaptation to climate change, we're talking about that and not anything else. Well, yes, that's good as far as it goes, but don't take that so seriously that you don't get engaged and integrate community-based adaptation with the whole development process at the community level and beyond. Strategize. Yes, we know that a lot can be done, will be done locally, community-based. But I think there's now a recognition, a growing recognition, that in order to cope with the steps that are going to be needed for adaptation, this has to be done on a broader scale because of long-term investments in infrastructure that will be around for decades, because of the questions of location and relocation, which are increasingly going to come to the fore on the international agenda. Training people, providing education, providing skills for them to do better what they are now doing is an important part of the process. But it might also include providing training and education and opportunities for people to move somewhere else to do something different. And that too, it seems to me, is an adaptation to climate change which can have its local community-based manifestations and a call on support to help that happen. As I said on Monday morning, don't just leave it with those 4 points of upscale, outscale, integrate and strategize, and forget mitigation. Mitigation is important. I'm very happy that adaptation has risen to take equal attention, and in some countries higher attention than mitigation on the agenda of priorities. But it remains the fundamental heart of this issue. We know now that mitigation is going to be a lot more difficult. It's going to take longer than was anticipated in 1992, and we know that climate change is happening faster than we thought it was going to in 1992 when the convention was signed. So in doing our adaptation work, don't take your eye off the need for mitigation, and where there are mitigation co-benefits, even at the local level, even at small communities, it's a good lesson to show the rest of the world that we need to take mitigation more urgently than we have been doing in the recent past. I want to add a 6th footnote, and I want to call that pathways. Not a roadmap, because we can't see the future very clearly. But we do need to think about the direction and character of development, because climate change is going to pose, does already pose, a major threat to what we think of as the conventional development pathway. We can't go on doing what we have been doing. Well, people have been telling us since the Brundtland Commission and the ONCED conference and lots of other events that we have to change our ways. But there is a message coming from this community that is adding to that debate and that discourse. I have an opportunity in the 5th assessment of the IPCC as a contributor to a chapter in Working Group 2, the title of which is Climate Resilient Pathways, Adaptation, Mitigation, and Sustainable Development. So here in that chapter, as in the 4 adaptation chapters that Slim has mentioned, there's an opportunity to strengthen IPCC thinking and to bring into it the kind of knowledge, the kinds of understandings that have been manifested so well here this week. But of course, in so doing, the IPCC will have to maintain its standards of scientific rigor, which are an essential and vital part of its operation. And perhaps we shall hear more from Dr. Pachauri about that. But this book that has been mentioned, and anything else we can do to make our material available in ways that it can feed into the IPCC process, and make that process a very scientific assessment process, more sensitive and more aware to community-based adaptation work, then the better we shall be in spreading our message out and spreading our message up, as well as integrating and strategizing. I should say that I have been in this adaptation business for quite a long time. I was there in 1992 when the convention was signed and participated from the earliest days in the work of the IPCC. So it is a huge pleasure, sense of satisfaction to me to see this kind of conversation, this kind of dynamic interchange taking place. And I want to congratulate you all, thank you all, and say thank you very much.